An iron box sealed for 15 years is finally opened by Jungkook after meeting Jimin, revealing a life-changing secret that rewrites destiny forever. "Don't touch it," the old man's trembling voice cracked through the abandoned warehouse just as Jungkook's fingers brushed against the cold iron lid. The warning arrived a heartbeat too late. The rusted lock, untouched for 15 years, broke apart with a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the silent building like a gunshot. Dust burst into the air, dancing in the pale sunlight that slipped through broken windows, while the smell of aged iron and forgotten paper surrounded him. Jungkook froze. His pulse thundered inside his ears. Every instinct told him to step back, yet his hands refused to leave the weathered box that had haunted his dreams ever since he was a child. The iron box was smaller than he had imagined. Its black surface was scarred with scratches, patches of rust, and faded engravings that looked almost alive beneath the dust. Across the lid, carved deeply into the metal by an unknown hand, were the words that had shaped 15 years of unanswered questions. Asterisk don't open until you meet Jimin. Jungkook stared at the sentence until it blurred before his eyes. "I met him," he whispered. The old man, standing several feet away, lowered his head, unable to hide the sorrow in his tired eyes. His wrinkled hands trembled as though he had been carrying this burden for decades. "You should have walked away," he said quietly. "I've waited my whole life for this." So did someone else. Silence swallowed the warehouse. Outside, rain began falling against the broken roof. Tiny droplets slipped through the holes above, landing on the iron lid with soft rhythmic taps. The sound blended with Jungkook's racing heartbeat. His fingertips traced the faded engraving once more. He remembered the first time he had seen the box. He had been only 10 years old. His grandfather had hidden it beneath the floorboards of their mountain cabin, believing the curious boy had fallen asleep. But Jungkook had watched everything through the narrow crack of his bedroom door. He still remembered every movement. The careful wrapping, the heavy lock, the strange sentence, and above all, the tears running down his grandfather's face. That night, Jungkook had asked the simplest question: "Who's Jimin?" Instead of answering, his grandfather had hugged him tighter than ever before. "When the time comes," the old man had whispered, "you'll understand why some promises are heavier than chains." The next morning, his grandfather was gone. No farewell, no explanation. Only the locked iron box remained. For 15 years, Jungkook searched for both the missing man and the mysterious Jimin, whose name had been engraved into his destiny. He searched cities, villages, schools, hospitals, archives. Every person named Jimin became another dead end. Eventually, the search became an obsession. Friends called him foolish. Employers complained that he disappeared for days chasing rumors. Relationships ended because every conversation somehow returned to the same impossible question. Who was Jimin? Why couldn't the box be opened before meeting him? What could possibly be hidden inside for 15 years? Life moved forward, but Jungkook remained trapped in the same unanswered moment. Until 3 weeks ago. He had wandered into a small coastal bookstore during a storm. The shop smelled of old pages, cedar wood, and freshly brewed coffee. Wind chimes near the entrance rang softly every time the sea breeze entered. Behind the counter stood a young man quietly repairing an ancient novel. He wore a cream-colored sweater despite the warm afternoon. His sleeves were rolled neatly to his elbows, revealing faint white scars crossing one wrist. His movements were gentle, almost careful enough not to disturb the silence surrounding him. When he looked up, their eyes met. Something inside Jungkook stopped. Not because the stranger was unusually handsome. Not because there was anything dramatic about the moment. It was because the stranger looked at him as though he had been expected. You finally came, the young man had said with a small smile. Jungkook had frowned. Do we know each other? I don't think we've met. But I dreamed about your face. Those words should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, they felt strangely familiar. The young man introduced himself. My name is Jimin. For several long seconds, Jungkook forgot how to breathe. Every year of searching, every unanswered question, every sleepless night, everything had led to this quiet bookstore by the sea. Jimin noticed the color draining from Jungkook's face. Are you all right? Instead of answering, Jungkook had laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he was terrified. Since childhood, he had imagined thousands of versions of Jimin. A criminal, a scientist, a forgotten prince, a dangerous enemy. Never someone whose smile felt warm enough to make complete strangers feel safe. Over the following weeks, they met again and again. Coffee became conversations. Conversations became evening walks. Evening walks became long nights watching waves crash against dark cliffs beneath endless stars. Jimin possessed strange habits. Whenever he became anxious, he folded tiny paper cranes from bookstore receipts. Whenever rain began, he instinctively counted the seconds between lightning and thunder. Whenever someone lied, he unconsciously rubbed the scar on his wrist. He never explained why. Jungkook noticed everything. Jimin also noticed things. That Jungkook never drank the last sip of coffee. That he always looked over his shoulder before entering unfamiliar buildings. That loud metallic sounds made him flinch almost imperceptibly. Neither asked questions. Both carried invisible histories. Neither realized how deeply connected those histories truly were. Yesterday evening, while watching the sunset disappear into the ocean, Jimin suddenly asked a question. Have you ever felt like your life started before you were born? Jungkook looked toward the horizon. Every day. Jimin smiled sadly. I thought I was the only one. Something about those words convinced Jungkook that the waiting was finally over. This morning, he returned to the abandoned warehouse where the iron box had remained hidden beneath loose wooden boards for 15 years. Now the lid slowly creaked open. The rusty hinges screamed as though protesting the passage of time itself. Inside lay no treasure, no gold, no jewels, only a single envelope wrapped carefully in faded blue cloth. Its paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained astonishingly clear. Across the front, written in elegant black ink, were 7 simple words. To Jungkook and Jimin, read this together. Jungkook held the envelope so carefully that it almost seemed alive. The paper felt fragile beneath his fingertips, its edges softened by 15 years of waiting. A faint scent of cedar wood and old ink drifted upward, as though time itself had been preserved inside the sealed fold. The old man watched without speaking, his weathered face reflecting both relief and grief. For years he had imagined this moment, yet now that it had arrived, it felt heavier than memory itself. I have to bring this to him, Jungkook said. The old man closed his eyes. You do. No more secrets. No more. Jungkook slipped the envelope inside his jacket and hurried into the rain. Cold drops soaked his hair within seconds, but he barely noticed. Every traffic light seemed unbearably slow. Every crowded street became another obstacle between him and the answer that had waited 15 years. The bookstore's bell chimed softly when he pushed open the wooden door. Warm air wrapped around him immediately, carrying the familiar fragrance of old books, roasted coffee beans, and lavender. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the polished floor. Jimin looked up from a stack of antique journals. His gentle smile faded the instant he saw Jungkook's expression. What happened? I found it. Jimin blinked. The box. Silence settled between them. Without another word, Jimin flipped the sign on the front door from open to closed. He locked it, drew the curtains over the rain-covered windows, and turned off the music that had been quietly playing in the background. Only the ticking of an old grandfather clock remained. They sat across from each other at the reading table near the fireplace. Between them rested the yellowed envelope. Neither reached for it. Neither seemed ready to disturb 15 years of silence. Finally, Jimin spoke. Do you know something strange? Jungkook looked at him. When I was little, my grandmother used to tell me that someday someone would arrive carrying a promise older than either of us. Jungkook's heartbeat slowed. I thought it was just a bedtime story. So did I. Jimin laughed softly, though there was no joy behind it. She never told me his name. Jungkook carefully unfolded the blue cloth surrounding the envelope. The seal had become brittle with age. With one slow breath, he broke it. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly, yet every sentence remained perfectly readable. Jungkook began reading aloud. If these words have reached both of you, then destiny has been kinder than I ever hoped. It means you found each other before the truth disappeared forever. The room grew impossibly still. First, forgive me for forcing you to wait. There was no safer choice. Jimin leaned forward unconsciously. Neither of you remembers the summer when you were children. Jungkook stopped reading. His eyes lifted toward Jimin. You remember anything? Jimin slowly shook his head. No. Neither of them spoke for several seconds before Jungkook continued. Memory can be erased by fear. It cannot be erased by love. A strange ache settled inside Jimin's chest. Something about those words felt painfully familiar. When you were both 10 years old, you made a promise beneath the oldest lighthouse on the eastern coast. Jimin's breathing became uneven. A flash appeared inside his mind. A lighthouse. The smell of salt. A child's laughter. Then darkness again. He pressed his fingers against his temples. I saw something. Jungkook lowered the letter. What? I don't know. Another image surfaced. Two boys sitting on sun-warmed rocks. One carving initials into driftwood. The other laughing because he kept spelling his own name wrong. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had come. Jimin inhaled sharply. I've dreamed about the ocean since I was a child. Jungkook stared at him. So have I. Neither understood why those simple words felt so significant. He continued reading. If you are reading this together, then neither of you abandon the promise. The next sentence made Jungkook's hands tremble. The iron box was never meant to protect what was inside. Rain hammered harder against the bookstore windows. It was meant to protect both of you from the people searching for this letter. Jimin slowly looked toward the front door. The people searching for it. Jungkook nodded silently before reading further. Trust no one who asks about the lighthouse before asking about each other. The fireplace crackled quietly. Its warm orange glow illuminated the final page. The truth begins where the sea meets the forgotten light. Beneath the sentence lay a detailed hand-drawn map. Neither of them recognized it immediately. Then Jimin's eyes widened. I know this place. You do. He pointed toward a curved stretch of coastline. My grandmother used to take me there every autumn. Jungkook followed his finger. At the edge of the map stood an isolated lighthouse overlooking jagged cliffs. Its name was written in elegant handwriting. Moonkeeper Lighthouse. Jimin swallowed. It burned down 15 years ago. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Exactly 15 years. Jimin slowly nodded. Neither noticed the faint reflection moving beyond the rain-covered bookstore window. Across the street, inside a parked black sedan, a man lowered a pair of binoculars. He reached for a small radio. "They opened the box," he said calmly. A distorted voice answered through static. "Then proceed to phase 2. The sedan's engine started quietly. Inside the bookstore, completely unaware they were being watched, Jungkook carefully folded the old letter. For the first time in 15 years, the mystery no longer felt impossible. It finally had a destination. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of weathered steel. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the streets washed clean, while a cool sea breeze drifted through the narrow roads surrounding the old bookstore. Jungkook stood by the front window, staring toward the distant coastline where the forgotten lighthouse waited beyond layers of mist. The folded letter rested safely inside his jacket, close enough that he could feel its edges every time his heart beat. Jimin emerged from the back room, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He placed one beside Jungkook before quietly taking the seat opposite him. "I couldn't sleep," Jimin admitted. "Neither could I." For several moments, they simply listened to the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock. Jimin finally spoke. "I kept having the same dream." Jungkook turned toward him. "A lighthouse." Jimin nodded slowly. "And someone was calling my name." His fingers tightened around the warm ceramic mug. "I never saw their face." Jungkook hesitated before answering. "I dreamed of a little boy." Jimin looked up. He was standing at the top of a cliff, holding a tiny iron key. The bookstore suddenly felt colder. "The strange part," Jungkook continued quietly, "was that I knew he trusted me more than anyone." Neither noticed how naturally the conversation flowed, as though these dreams had been waiting years to be spoken aloud. Jimin stood and walked toward an old wooden cabinet tucked beside the shelves. He searched through several drawers before carefully lifting out a faded leather journal. "My grandmother left this for me." The journal looked ancient, its brown cover cracked with age, its pages yellowed and uneven. "I've read it dozens of times." He placed it on the table. "There are entries I never understood." Jungkook opened the journal carefully. Most pages described ordinary days. Fishing villages, storms, book recommendations, family recipes. Then, almost halfway through, the handwriting suddenly changed. The words became hurried, uneven, almost desperate. "If they ever remember the lighthouse, everything begins again." Jungkook frowned. The next sentence sent a chill through both of them. "Hide the compass before they arrive." "Compass?" Jungkook asked. Jimin slowly turned several pages until a folded piece of parchment slipped onto the table. It was another hand-drawn map. Unlike the one inside the iron box, this one showed the interior of the lighthouse. Rooms, hidden staircases, storage chambers. At the very center, beneath a circular symbol, someone had written 2 words. "North Chamber." Jimin stared silently. "I've never seen this page before." "You've had this journal your whole life." "I know." They examined the paper more closely. A tiny note had been written in the corner using nearly invisible ink. Jungkook tilted the page toward the sunlight. The hidden sentence slowly appeared. "Only 2 hands together can reveal the path." Without thinking, Jungkook placed one hand on the parchment. Jimin instinctively did the same. Nothing happened. They exchanged awkward smiles. "I guess it wasn't literal," Jimin said. Before Jungkook could answer, a faint shimmer spread across the old paper. Lines that had been invisible moments earlier slowly emerged, glowing softly beneath their fingertips. Both men froze. The blank spaces filled with delicate silver markings, revealing an underground tunnel stretching beneath the lighthouse and continuing toward the cliffs overlooking the sea. Neither spoke. The silence itself seemed astonished. Jimin slowly lifted his hand. The glowing lines remained. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." His voice was barely above a whisper. Then another sentence appeared. "The compass sleeps beneath the keeper's shadow." The silver glow faded almost immediately. Only the completed map remained. Jimin looked toward Jungkook. "I don't believe in magic." "I didn't either." A quiet laugh escaped both of them, not because anything was amusing, but because neither could find another way to react. Outside, clouds drifted apart, allowing sunlight to illuminate the distant ocean. The abandoned lighthouse stood barely visible against the cliffs. It looked lonely, almost forgotten, yet something about it felt strangely familiar, as though it had been waiting. An hour later, they packed only what seemed necessary. Flashlights, a first aid kit, water, the two maps, the letter. Before leaving, Jimin paused beside the bookshelf near the entrance. His gaze settled on a framed photograph. It showed him as a child standing beside his grandmother. For years, he had believed they were alone. Today, for the first time, he noticed something hidden in the background. Far behind them, near the shoreline, stood two blurred figures. One appeared to be an elderly man wearing a dark coat. The other was a young boy. The boy's face was impossible to distinguish, but around his neck hung a small silver key. Jungkook stepped closer. His breathing slowed. "I've seen that key." Jimin turned toward him. "In my dreams." Neither removed their eyes from the old photograph. The silver key reflected a tiny beam of sunlight, despite the image being 15 years old. Jimin carefully removed the photograph from its frame. Behind it, tucked between the cardboard backing and the faded picture, rested a thin brass object no larger than a finger. A key. Old. Delicately crafted. Its bow was engraved with the shape of a lighthouse. Jimin stared at it in disbelief. This was hidden here all these years. Jungkook accepted the key with extraordinary care. The metal felt unexpectedly warm, as though someone had been holding it only moments before. He turned it over. On the opposite side, a single word had been engraved. Together. For the first time since opening the iron box, neither fear nor confusion filled the room. Instead, they shared the quiet certainty that every forgotten memory, every unanswered question, and every step they had taken for the past 15 years had been leading them toward the same place. The road to Moonkeeper Lighthouse no longer felt like the beginning of a mystery. It felt like the journey home. The road to Moonkeeper Lighthouse wound along the edge of towering cliffs, where the sea crashed relentlessly against jagged black rocks. The afternoon sky remained overcast, bathing the coastline in pale silver light that blurred the horizon into a dreamlike haze. Jungkook drove in silence, both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Beside him, Jimin held the brass key inside his palm, as though afraid it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Neither spoke for nearly an hour. Only the rhythmic sound of the tires rolling across damp asphalt and the distant cries of seagulls filled the quiet. Finally, Jimin broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like you're remembering something that never happened?" Jungkook glanced toward him. "Every time I look at you." Jimin lowered his eyes. "I don't know why, but when we first met, it didn't feel like meeting someone new. It felt familiar. Yes. The words lingered between them. The coastal road narrowed until it became little more than an abandoned trail surrounded by wind-bent pine trees. Fallen leaves drifted across the cracked pavement, and wild grass swallowed the remains of an old wooden sign whose faded letters barely remained visible. Monkep lighthouse closed. The final word had almost completely peeled away. Jungkook parked beside the rusting gate. The ocean roared somewhere below the cliffs. Cold wind immediately wrapped around them as they stepped outside. The air smelled of salt, damp earth, and weathered stone. Far ahead, through layers of mist, the lighthouse emerged. Its white walls had long since turned grey. Large cracks stretched from its base to its shattered lantern room. Vines climbed the stone like silent hands, reclaiming what time had abandoned. The burned remains of wooden balconies clung stubbornly to the tower. It looked less like a building and more like a memory refusing to disappear. Neither spoke as they approached. Every footstep echoed unnaturally loudly across the deserted grounds. The main entrance hung half open. Its massive oak door creaked softly in the wind. Jimin stopped just before crossing the threshold. My grandmother never let me come inside. Did she say why? She always said. His voice faded. That some places remember more than people do. Jungkook looked at the dark entrance. Then he stepped inside. Dust floated through thin beams of light that filtered from broken windows high above. The interior smelled of old smoke, wet stone, and decades of silence. Collapsed beams lay scattered across the floor. Fragments of broken glass sparkled beneath layers of dust. Yet despite the ruin, something felt strangely untouched. Almost preserved. As though the lighthouse had been waiting. Jimin slowly walked toward the center of the circular chamber. His breathing became uneven. I've been here. Jungkook turned. What? I don't remember when. Jimin closed his eyes. But I've stood exactly here before. A sharp ringing filled his ears. The room blurred. Suddenly, laughter. Children's laughter. For a brief instant, the ruined lighthouse transformed. The broken walls became whole. The dust vanished. Warm sunlight poured through spotless windows. Two boys ran across the polished wooden floor. One carried a paper windmill. The other chased him, laughing breathlessly. Jimin's eyes flew open. The vision disappeared. He staggered backward. Jungkook caught him before he fell. What happened? I saw. His voice trembled. Nasu. Jungkook froze. You think they were us? I don't know. But it felt real. Neither realized that Jungkook had unconsciously wrapped one arm around Jimin, exactly as the older boy had done in the fading memory. Their attention shifted toward the spiral staircase winding upward through the tower. Most of the wooden steps had collapsed. Only fragments remained. Jungkook unfolded the hidden map from Jimin's journal. The north chamber isn't above. He traced the silver markings. It's below. They searched the circular room carefully. Every cracked stone. Every fallen beam. Every broken cabinet. Minutes passed. Then Jimin noticed something unusual. Near the fireplace stood the weathered stone statue of an old lighthouse keeper. Unlike everything else, the statue remained almost perfectly intact. Its shadows stretched across the floor. Jimin remembered the glowing sentence. The compass sleeps beneath the keeper's shadow. He slowly looked downward. The statue's shadow pointed toward a loose stone embedded in the floor. Jungkook knelt beside it. The stone shifted slightly beneath his fingers. Together they pushed. With a deep grinding sound, the slab slid aside. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient wood. Jimin switched on his flashlight. The beam disappeared into the blackness below. Without hesitation, they descended. Each step echoed through the underground passage. Water dripped somewhere ahead. The tunnel walls were lined with rough stone covered in patches of moss. After several minutes, they reached a heavy iron door. Unlike the ruined lighthouse above, this door showed almost no rust. At its center rested an intricate lock shaped like a lighthouse lantern. Jimin slowly lifted the brass key. It fit perfectly. He looked toward Jungkook. "Ready?" Jungkook nodded. The key turned with surprising ease. A loud metallic click echoed through the chamber. The iron door slowly swung inward. Warm golden light spilled into the tunnel. Beyond the doorway lay a perfectly preserved underground room, untouched by time. Bookshelves lined the walls. Maps covered a massive wooden table. Dozens of journals rested neatly inside glass cabinets. An antique brass compass stood upon a stone pedestal at the center of the room. Its needle spun wildly for several seconds before stopping. It pointed directly toward Jungkook. Then, without moving, it slowly turned again, until it pointed at Jimin. The needle continued shifting back and forth between them, as though unable to choose. Jimin stepped closer. On the pedestal, beneath the compass, lay a small engraved plaque. Its words were simple. "Only when both hearts remember will the final truth awaken." The underground chamber was silent, except for the soft ticking of the antique brass compass. Its needle continued to sway between Jungkook and Jimin with an almost human hesitation, never settling on a single direction for more than a few seconds. The golden light illuminating the room came from dozens of oil lamps fixed along the stone walls. Strangely, every flame burned steadily despite the absence of anyone who could have tended them for 15 years. Jungkook slowly approached the pedestal. "This place should be covered in dust." Jimin looked around. "It isn't." The polished wooden shelves gleamed softly beneath the warm light. Leather-bound journals stood in perfect order. Glass display cases remained spotless. Even the ink bottles on an old writing desk looked as though someone had left only moments ago. Nothing felt abandoned. Everything felt protected. Jungkook reached toward the compass. The moment his fingertips touched the cool brass, a faint vibration traveled through the pedestal. The needle stopped moving. For one long heartbeat, it pointed directly north. Then it spun once more, before settling exactly between Jungkook and Jimin. A quiet metallic sound echoed beneath the floor. Click, click, click. Both men instinctively stepped backward. Hidden gears awakened somewhere inside the ancient chamber. The bookshelf along the northern wall slowly divided into two halves. Behind it appeared another room. Smaller, round. Its ceiling was painted with countless stars that shimmered beneath the lamplight. In the very center stood a circular stone table upon which rested a wooden chest wrapped in faded blue cloth, identical to the fabric that had protected the letter inside the iron box. Jimin inhaled sharply. "The same cloth." Jungkook nodded. "They're connected." They entered the hidden chamber cautiously. Unlike the first room, this one carried the unmistakable scent of cedar, lavender, and old parchment. The air itself seemed warmer, more personal, almost comforting. The wooden chest was surprisingly light. Jimin carefully untied the cloth. Inside rested several objects arranged with remarkable care. A silver pocket watch, a tiny paper windmill whose faded colors had nearly disappeared, 2 seashell bracelets woven from blue thread, a photograph, and beneath them all, a sealed journal. Jungkook picked up the photograph first. It showed 2 boys standing in front of Moonkeeper Lighthouse beneath a bright summer sky. One smiled confidently with windswept dark hair. The other laughed while holding a paper windmill above his head. Behind them stood an elderly couple. Everyone looked wonderfully happy. Jungkook stared silently. His hands began to tremble. "That's..." Jimin stepped beside him. Neither spoke. They already knew. The boys were unmistakably themselves. Only younger. Around 10 years old. Jimin gently touched the photograph. "I don't remember this day." "Neither do I." Yet as soon as his finger brushed the image, another memory burst into his mind. Sunlight. Warm stone beneath bare feet. Children racing around the lighthouse. A woman laughing as she packed sandwiches into a picnic basket. An old man pretending to lose a game of hide-and-seek just to hear 2 boys celebrate their victory. The memory lasted only seconds before dissolving. Jungkook pressed a hand against his forehead. "I remember laughing." Jimin smiled faintly. "I remember your laugh." Both froze. Neither understood how such certainty could exist without explanation. Jimin reached for the sealed journal. Unlike the previous letter, its cover bore no title. Only a single, handwritten sentence. "For the day your memories begin returning." He slowly opened it. The first page contained elegant handwriting. "Memory protects the heart until the heart becomes strong enough to protect memory." Several pages described ordinary summers at the lighthouse. Fishing, reading, building paper boats, watching meteor showers. Then the entries changed. The handwriting became heavier, filled with concern. "They have started asking questions about the children." Another page. "Someone followed us from the harbor today." Another. "The lighthouse is no longer safe." Jungkook turned each page more quickly. Every entry painted a growing picture of fear. Whoever had written the journal had been desperately trying to protect 2 children from an unknown danger. Then they reached the final completed page. Both stopped breathing. "If this journal survives, it means our greatest hope survived with it. Jungkook and Jimin must never believe they were chosen because they are extraordinary. They became extraordinary because they chose kindness when fear demanded hatred. Whatever happens, let them remember this before they remember anything else." Silence settled over the chamber. Neither man realized tears had quietly gathered in their eyes. Jimin whispered the words again. "They became extraordinary because they chose kindness." His voice broke. "I don't even remember what we did." Jungkook closed the journal carefully. "Maybe that's not the important part." "What is?" "Maybe the important part is who we became." Jimin looked toward him. For the first time since opening the iron box, neither saw a stranger. There was no miraculous flash of complete memory. No sudden revelation. Only an inexplicable feeling that somewhere beneath 15 years of forgotten time, their lives had once been woven together with unbreakable trust. The quiet was interrupted by a low mechanical hum. The compass outside the chamber began spinning wildly again. "Vasto! Vasto!" Its brass needle vibrated so violently that it produced a faint ringing sound. Jungkook hurried back into the main room. The needle no longer pointed toward either of them. Instead, it fixed itself on the stone wall opposite the entrance. A circular symbol slowly emerged from the rock, glowing with a pale blue light. Lines spread across the wall like veins, revealing the outline of a massive hidden door that had been invisible only moments before. Carved into the center of the stone were 6 words. The truth remembers those who return together. Without warning, the ancient door began to rise, revealing a long passage that stretched deep beneath the cliffs. At the far end of the tunnel, illuminated by shafts of natural light filtering through cracks above, stood a solitary tree with silver leaves growing impossibly beneath the earth. Its branches shimmered as though every leaf reflected a different forgotten memory. Jungkook and Jimin stood motionless, overwhelmed not by fear, but by the profound sense that they had finally reached the place where the lost years had been patiently waiting for them to come home. Jungkook and Jimin stepped into the hidden passage with quiet determination, their footsteps echoing gently against the smooth stone floor. The ancient door closed behind them with a deep, resonant thud, sealing the underground chamber in silence. Ahead, the tunnel curved softly toward the radiant silver tree, whose leaves shimmered like fragments of moonlight suspended in still air. Every breath carried an unfamiliar fragrance, a delicate mixture of rain-soaked earth, wild jasmine, and the salty breeze of the sea above. The closer they walked, the warmer the tunnel became. Unlike the cold corridors behind them, this place felt alive. Tiny streams of clear water flowed beside the path, reflecting the silver glow overhead. Their gentle murmuring blended with the distant rhythm of waves striking the cliffs beyond the stone, creating a melody that seemed older than language itself. Jimin slowed his pace. "I've heard this sound before." Jungkook looked at him. "The water." "No." Jimin closed his eyes. It was someone humming. As soon as the words left his mouth, another memory stirred inside him. A woman sat beneath a tree, quietly humming, while 2 children gathered fallen leaves around her feet. One of the boys laughed after accidentally dropping an entire basket of seashells. The other knelt beside him, helping collect every shell without saying a word. The vision vanished. Jimin opened his eyes, breathing unevenly. "I think someone used to sing to us." Jungkook felt an unexpected ache inside his chest. "I remember the melody." "You do?" "I can't remember the words." Without realizing it, Jungkook softly hummed a few uncertain notes. Jimin froze. His eyes widened. He continued the melody instinctively. Their voices blended naturally, completing a lullaby neither of them consciously remembered learning. The final note faded into the silence. For a brief moment, the silver leaves overhead shimmered brighter. Then they began to fall. Hundreds of glowing leaves drifted slowly through the air like snow, touching neither the ground nor the travelers. Instead, they circled gently around Jungkook and Jimin before dissolving into tiny particles of light. The great silver tree stood only a few steps away. Its trunk was enormous, its bark smooth and pale as polished marble. Thousands of names had been carved into its surface over generations. Some had faded almost completely. Others remained sharp. Jungkook ran his fingers lightly across the carvings. Families, dates, short messages, promises. Near the center of the trunk, 2 names appeared side by side. Jungkook, Jimin **. Beneath them was a sentence carved with extraordinary care. "No matter what time forgets, kindness remembers." Neither spoke. The words settled deep within them. Jimin rested his hand against the trunk. The surface felt warm, almost like living skin. A gentle pulse spread through the tree. The bark slowly separated, revealing a hidden hollow inside. Resting within it was a beautifully crafted wooden music box. Its surface was decorated with tiny silver stars and a lighthouse overlooking the sea. There was no lock, only a small wind-up key. Jimin carefully lifted the music box. It felt surprisingly light. He glanced toward Jungkook. "Should I?" Jungkook smiled softly. "I think it has been waiting." Jimin turned the tiny key. One rotation. Two. Three. The mechanism clicked gently. A delicate melody filled the tunnel. The same lullaby they had unconsciously sung only moments earlier. As the music echoed beneath the earth, the silver tree glowed brilliantly. Light flowed through every branch, every leaf, every root. The tunnel itself seemed to breathe. Images slowly appeared within the glowing trunk, like reflections inside still water. Two boys running across the beach, building sandcastles, flying homemade kites, reading stories beneath the lighthouse, laughing until sunset painted the ocean gold. The memories unfolded peacefully, one after another. There was no fear, no danger, only friendship so pure that it seemed untouched by time. Jimin smiled through tears he no longer tried to hide. "We were happy." Jungkook nodded quietly. "Very." Another image emerged. The elderly man from Jungkook's childhood stood beside Jimin's grandmother beneath the lighthouse. Both watched the children with affectionate smiles. The old man spoke. Although no sound came from the vision, his lips formed clear words. "Protect them." The grandmother nodded. Then both adults looked toward someone standing beyond the edge of the image. Their warm expressions disappeared. Concern replaced them. The memory blurred before revealing another scene. The lighthouse at night. Powerful rain. Violent wind. Several unfamiliar figures climbing the cliff carrying lanterns. The two children hurried into the underground chamber beneath the lighthouse, while the elderly couple remained above. The image ended before anything more could be seen. Silence returned. Jimin lowered his head. "They were protecting us." Jungkook's voice was barely audible. "They chose to stay behind." Neither knew exactly what had happened that night, but both understood the cost of the promise that had followed. Jungkook gently closed the music box. The glowing visions slowly faded. Only the silver tree remained. A small object dropped softly from one of its branches. It landed upon the moss without a sound. Jimin picked it up. It was a polished silver pendant shaped like a lighthouse lantern. Inside the tiny glass center rested a folded piece of paper no larger than a fingernail. With great care, Jungkook unfolded it. Only one sentence had been written. "The last answer waits where the first sunrise touched your promise." The words felt less like another mystery and more like an invitation. Neither felt frustrated. Instead, an unexpected peace settled over them. For 15 years, they had searched for explanations. Now they were discovering something far more valuable. Not simply what they had forgotten, but who they had always been. Together, they left the silver tree behind, carrying the music box, the pendant, and the growing certainty that every forgotten step had quietly guided them toward a truth rooted not in secrets, but in the enduring power of loyalty, compassion, and a promise that time itself had failed to erase. The climb back to the surface was slower than their descent. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke as they retraced their steps through the underground passage beneath Moonkeeper Lighthouse. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable, as though the years they had lost were quietly stitching themselves together with every shared breath. When they emerged from the hidden chamber, the late afternoon sun had broken through the clouds. Golden light poured through the shattered windows of the abandoned lighthouse, illuminating countless dust particles that drifted lazily through the air like tiny stars. The ruined tower no longer seemed haunted. Instead, it felt peaceful, as though it had fulfilled the promise it had guarded for 15 long years. Jimin paused beside one of the broken windows. The sea stretched endlessly before them. Its waves glittered beneath the fading sunlight. "The first sunrise," he whispered. Jungkook unfolded the tiny note again. "The last answer waits where the first sunrise touched your promise." He looked toward the eastern horizon. "The eastern cliffs." Jimin slowly nodded. "There used to be a place. You remember. Only pieces." He closed his eyes. "I remember waking up before dawn. The air was freezing. There was a wooden bench. And..." His breathing slowed. "A giant white rock facing the ocean." Jungkook felt another memory surface inside him. Two children wrapped in oversized blankets. A thermos of hot chocolate. An elderly man laughing because neither child could stay awake long enough to watch the sunrise. He smiled unconsciously. "I remember complaining about the cold." Jimin laughed softly. "And I stole your gloves." Jungkook blinked. "You remember that?" "Eyes don't know how." Both laughed together. It was the first genuine laughter either of them had shared since opening the iron box. The sound echoed gently through the lighthouse. For the first time, the building no longer felt like the keeper of a mystery. It felt like the witness of countless happy memories waiting to be remembered. They followed an overgrown trail leading east along the cliffs. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the stone path. The salty wind carried the cries of distant seabirds. The farther they walked, the more familiar everything began to feel. A crooked pine tree leaning toward the sea. A weathered fence nearly swallowed by vines. A small stone bridge crossing a narrow stream. Neither knew how they recognized these places. They simply did. After nearly half an hour, the trail opened onto a quiet cliff overlooking the ocean. There it was, the enormous white rock. Time had stained its surface with patches of gray moss, but its shape remained unmistakable. Beside it stood the remains of an old wooden bench. One leg had collapsed years ago, leaving it tilted awkwardly toward the sea. Jimin walked forward slowly. His heartbeat quickened. Without thinking, he knelt beside the bench. His fingers brushed away years of dirt and fallen leaves. Something had been carved into the wood. Very faint, almost invisible. Together they cleaned the weathered surface. Little by little, the carving emerged. Two uneven sets of childish handwriting. One read, Jungkook. The other, Jimin. Between the names was a clumsy drawing of a lighthouse. Below it, a sentence carved with obvious determination, despite the shaky letters. "We'll always find each other." Neither could speak. The words reached deeper than memory. They reached something fundamental. Something that had survived 15 years of silence. Jimin rested his forehead against the old bench. "I remember now." Jungkook looked at him quietly. "We promised." His voice trembled. "That even if we forgot everything." A tear slipped down his cheek. "We would never stop looking." Jungkook closed his eyes. The final barrier inside his memory quietly dissolved. Fragments rushed back. Long summer afternoons. Building paper boats. Reading adventure stories beneath the lighthouse. Arguing over who climbed the spiral stairs faster. Watching meteor showers while lying on the grass. Sharing dreams that only children could imagine. Then, the final night. Rain. Fear. The elderly couple leading them underground. A hurried goodbye. The old man kneeling before Jungkook. No matter what happens, protect this promise. Jimin's grandmother embracing them both. You may forget today, but your hearts never will. The memories faded gently, leaving only warmth behind. Jungkook sat beside Jimin on the old bench. Neither questioned what they remembered. Neither needed proof. The truth no longer lived inside letters, journals, or hidden rooms. It lived within them. Jimin smiled through quiet tears. So that's why the box waited. Jungkook nodded. It wasn't waiting for you to meet someone. He looked toward Jimin. It was waiting for us to remember each other. The evening sun slowly descended toward the horizon. Its golden light painted the ocean in brilliant shades of amber and crimson. Jimin reached into his pocket and removed the tiny lighthouse pendant. He placed it gently on the bench between their carved names. The silver lantern caught the sunlight, scattering dozens of tiny reflections across the weathered wood. For a fleeting moment, it looked exactly like a miniature sunrise. Jungkook watched the light dance across the carving. The promise kept us together. Jimin smiled. And kindness brought us back. The sea breeze carried away the last traces of uncertainty. The iron box had not preserved a secret. It had preserved hope. A hope entrusted to two children who had once believed that friendship could survive anything. 15 years later, standing where their first promise had greeted the sunrise, they finally understood that some memories fade, some places crumble, and some voices are lost to time. But a promise made with a sincere heart can quietly endure through every passing season, waiting patiently until the day two souls find their way back to each other. The days that followed unfolded with an unexpected calm. Jungkook and Jimin returned to the coastal bookstore, carrying nothing that looked extraordinary to anyone else. The iron box remained hidden once more beneath the lighthouse, the underground chambers were carefully sealed, and the journals rested exactly where they had been protected for 15 years. Neither of them felt the need to reveal what they had discovered. Some truths became stronger when they were quietly lived rather than loudly explained. Morning sunlight poured through the bookstore windows, warming the wooden shelves lined with old novels. The familiar aroma of coffee drifted through the room, while gentle music played from an antique record player in the corner. Customers arrived one after another, searching for forgotten stories, rare editions, or simply a peaceful place to escape the noise of the world. Jungkook found himself visiting every morning. At first, he claimed he was helping reorganize the older collections. Soon, there was no need for excuses. It simply became part of his life. Jimin noticed little things that always made him smile. Jungkook never placed books unevenly on the shelves. He always straightened crooked picture frames without realizing it. Whenever children entered the bookstore, he instinctively crouched to speak with them at eye level. Jimin watched those quiet habits with growing affection. One afternoon, while arranging a stack of travel journals, he laughed softly. You still count? Jungkook looked up. What? The books. You always tap each stack twice before moving to the next one. Jungkook frowned. I do. You've done it every day. Without thinking, Jungkook tapped the next pile twice. Only then did he realize Jimin was right. He smiled sheepishly. I never noticed. Jimin leaned against the shelf. I think you used to do that as a child. The observation lingered between them. Their recovered memories were still incomplete. Fragments returned unexpectedly. A familiar scent. A melody. The feel of sea wind. The sight of old photographs. None arrived all at once. Each appeared naturally, like stars slowly emerging after sunset. One quiet evening, they returned to the cliffs overlooking Moonkeeper Lighthouse. The abandoned tower stood peacefully against the fading sky. Wildflowers had begun growing around its weathered walls. Nature had quietly reclaimed the scars left by time. Jimin carried the small music box inside his backpack. He placed it upon the old wooden bench. The melody drifted gently across the sea once again. As the final notes faded, a flock of white seabirds lifted gracefully into the evening sky. Jungkook watched them disappear beyond the horizon. My grandfather used to say birds always know the way home. Jimin smiled. Maybe people do too. They sat in comfortable silence. The ocean reflected the colors of sunset. Orange, pink, deep violet. Neither noticed an elderly woman approaching along the narrow trail until she stopped a few steps away. Her silver hair danced gently in the breeze. She carried a wicker basket filled with freshly picked lavender. When she saw Jungkook and Jimin together, tears quietly filled her eyes. So, her voice trembled with quiet happiness. You finally remembered. Both men stood. Jimin stepped forward. Do we know you? The woman smiled warmly. My name is Hana. She looked toward the lighthouse. I grew up in the village below these cliffs. Jungkook felt an unexpected familiarity. The woman continued. I was the lighthouse keeper's daughter. Silence settled around them. She placed the basket upon the bench. I've waited many years, hoping this day would come. Jimin exchanged a glance with Jungkook. My grandmother. Hana nodded before he could finish. She and your grandfather were my closest friends. She reached into her coat pocket and removed a small folded photograph. Unlike the faded pictures inside the underground chamber, this one remained surprisingly well preserved. It showed 5 smiling figures standing before the lighthouse. The elderly couple. Young Hana. 10-year-old Jungkook. 10-year-old Jimin. Behind them, the ocean sparkled beneath a brilliant sunrise. Hana carefully turned the photograph over. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, was a single sentence. When they smile together again, our promise is complete. Jungkook slowly traced the faded ink. My grandfather wrote this. He did. Hana looked toward the endless sea. He believed people often confuse remembering with healing. Jimin listened quietly. But healing begins the moment you stop living inside yesterday. The breeze carried the fragrance of lavender across the cliff. Hana smiled gently. They never wanted you to spend your lives chasing old pain. She looked at both of them with remarkable tenderness. They only wanted you to find each other again. No one spoke for several moments. The setting sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. The first evening stars emerged overhead. Jungkook finally smiled. I think we understand now. Hana nodded. I hoped you would. Before leaving, she handed Jimin a tiny cloth pouch embroidered with the image of a lighthouse. It belongs with the music box. After she quietly disappeared along the winding trail, Jimin carefully opened the pouch. Inside rested 2 tiny seashells polished smooth by countless tides. Each shell bore a single engraved word. One read, Hope. The other, *home. Jungkook held the first shell. Jimin held the second. Neither needed to decide which belonged to whom. Together, they slipped both shells back into the pouch. Some treasures were never meant to be separated. As darkness gently settled over Moonkeeper Lighthouse, The waves continued their endless song against the cliffs, carrying with them the quiet certainty that the greatest promises are not measured by how long they are kept hidden, but by the lives they transform once they are finally fulfilled. Autumn arrived quietly along the coast, painting the cliffs with shades of amber and crimson. The sea became calmer, reflecting the cool morning sky like polished glass. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm for Jungkook and Jimin. The bookstore welcomed familiar faces every day, children filled the reading corner with laughter, and evenings were often spent walking the old coastal paths where forgotten memories had once begun to return. The mystery that had shaped 15 years of their lives no longer felt like a burden. It had become a part of who they were. One chilly morning, Jimin unlocked the bookstore as usual. A neatly wrapped parcel rested on the front doorstep. There was no postage stamp, no return address, only a small card attached with blue ribbon. Jungkook picked it up carefully. The handwriting was elegant and unfamiliar. Some promises are complete only when they are shared. He looked toward the empty street. No one was there. The village had only just begun to wake. A fisherman pushed his bicycle toward the harbor. A baker arranged fresh bread in a nearby window. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet both knew the parcel had not arrived by accident. They carried it inside. The wrapping paper was simple brown craft paper tied with white string. Inside lay an old wooden frame. Protected beneath the glass was a large map of the coastline. Unlike the maps hidden beneath the lighthouse, this one was beautifully illustrated with watercolor. Small handwritten notes marked dozens of familiar places. The bookstore, the lighthouse, the white cliff, the stone bridge, the silver tree, every location that had shaped their journey. Near the bottom corner, another inscription appeared. A place becomes home because of the people who protect it. Jimin smiled softly. They wanted us to keep this. Jungkook nodded. I think so. They hung the framed map beside the bookstore entrance where every visitor could see it. Customers admired its beautiful artwork without realizing the remarkable story hidden behind its gentle colors. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. The bookstore slowly became more than a shop. Travelers stopped to rest. Students gathered to study. Elderly villagers exchanged stories over warm tea. Children discovered books they had never imagined reading. The once quiet building gradually transformed into the heart of the small coastal town. Jungkook often repaired damaged books in the back room. He had surprisingly patient hands. Jimin loved recommending novels to anyone uncertain what to choose. Together they created a place filled with warmth, conversation, and quiet kindness. One rainy afternoon, a little boy wandered inside, carrying a torn adventure book. Its pages were falling apart. The child looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, he whispered. It belonged to my grandfather. Jungkook knelt beside him with a reassuring smile. Books aren't ruined because they're loved. The little boy looked up. They're not. No. Jungkook carefully accepted the worn book. They simply collect memories. Jimin watched the conversation from across the room. The words sounded strangely familiar. Later that evening, after the bookstore closed, he asked quietly, "Where did you learn that?" Jungkook paused. "I don't know." He smiled thoughtfully. "It just felt true." Jimin laughed. "I think your grandfather would agree." Days turned into months. Winter approached. One clear evening, the village announced the return of an old tradition that had not been celebrated for many years. The Festival of Lanterns. According to local history, families gathered once every winter along the cliffs, releasing hundreds of floating lanterns over the sea as symbols of gratitude, remembrance, and hope. Hana visited the bookstore carrying colorful paper lanterns folded neatly inside a wicker basket. The festival hasn't been held since the lighthouse closed, she explained. The village wants to bring it back. Jungkook carefully unfolded one lantern. Its thin paper glowed warmly beneath the afternoon light. Jimin smiled. It feels right. For several days, the entire village prepared together. Children painted lanterns with stars. Artists decorated them with waves and birds. Older residents wrote heartfelt wishes inside each lantern. On the evening of the festival, the cliffs shimmered beneath hundreds of tiny golden lights. Families gathered quietly beneath the winter sky. The ocean reflected every lantern like countless floating constellations. Jungkook and Jimin stood near the old wooden bench overlooking the sea. Each held a lantern. Neither wrote a wish immediately. Instead, they looked toward Moonkeeper Lighthouse. Though abandoned, the ancient tower seemed somehow brighter tonight. The stars above framed its silhouette with gentle silver light. Finally, Jimin wrote a single sentence. May every lost heart find its way home. Jungkook looked at the words before adding his own beneath them. And may every promise become kindness. Together, they lit the lantern. The warm flame flickered softly inside. As they released it into the night sky, the lantern rose slowly above the cliffs. One by one, hundreds more followed. Golden lights drifted peacefully over the ocean until they blended with the stars themselves. The villagers applauded quietly. Some smiled. Others wiped away silent tears. Hana stood nearby watching the glowing sky. For a brief moment, she imagined seeing two familiar figures standing beside the old lighthouse keeper's house. The elderly man and Jimin's grandmother. Their faces were peaceful. Their eyes filled with quiet pride. The vision disappeared with the gentle movement of the lanterns. Hana smiled to herself, not because she believed in ghosts, but because love, once deeply planted in a place, often leaves behind a presence that never truly fades. High above the sea, Jungkook's and Jimin's lantern continued rising until it became impossible to distinguish from the countless stars overhead, carrying with it a simple truth that no longer needed to be hidden inside an iron box. That the greatest inheritance one generation can leave the next is not wealth or secrets, but the courage to choose kindness, to protect hope, and to always become a light for someone searching in the dark. Winter settled gently over the coastline, covering the cliffs each morning with a veil of pale mist. Frost clung to the grass outside the bookstore, while the sea rolled quietly beneath a sky of soft silver clouds. Months had passed since the iron box had been opened, yet its quiet influence remained woven into the rhythm of Jungkook's and Jimin's lives. The bookstore had changed. Not in appearance. The wooden shelves were still lined with old novels, the antique clock still marked every peaceful hour, and the scent of coffee continued to greet every visitor. But the feeling inside had transformed. It had become a place where strangers lingered longer than they intended, where conversations began easily, where people left smiling without quite knowing why. One snowy afternoon, Hana arrived carrying a weathered wooden sign wrapped in linen. I found this while cleaning my attic, she said. It used to hang above the lighthouse entrance. Together, they carefully unfolded the cloth. The sign was beautifully carved despite its age. Its faded lettering read, "Every traveler deserves a light." Jungkook traced the words with quiet admiration. It belongs here now. Jimin nodded. Together they hung it above the entrance to the bookstore. The old lighthouse had once guided ships across dangerous waters. Now its message welcomed people searching for something less visible. Comfort, hope, belonging. As the weeks passed, visitors began leaving handwritten notes inside a small wooden box near the counter. Some thanked the bookstore for helping them through lonely days. Others shared stories of books that reminded them of loved ones. Children left colorful drawings. One elderly sailor wrote only a single sentence. "I thought I had forgotten how home feels." Jimin carefully kept every note. He stored them inside a drawer beneath the front desk. Not because they were valuable, because they mattered. One quiet evening, after the final customer had gone home, Jungkook noticed an empty notebook resting on one of the reading tables. Its cover was simple blue cloth. Inside, the first page contained only a title written in elegant handwriting. "For those who need a beginning." Jimin looked at him. "What if?" He smiled thoughtfully. "We start writing our own story." Jungkook laughed softly. "After everything we've discovered. Especially after everything." They sat beside the fireplace. Snow drifted silently beyond the windows. The warm glow of the flames illuminated the blank pages. Jungkook picked up a fountain pen. For several moments, he simply stared at the paper. Then he began writing. There was once an iron box that waited patiently for 15 years. Jimin watched the words appear. "No." Jungkook looked up. "What?" Jimin smiled. "That's where the mystery began." He gently turned back to the first page. "It isn't where the story began." Jungkook understood immediately. He crossed out the sentence. Together they wrote instead. There was once a promise between two children who believed kindness could survive even when memory could not. Neither spoke after that. The sentence felt complete. Over the following weeks, they filled page after page. Not with impossible mysteries. Not with hidden chambers. Not with forgotten maps. They wrote about friendship. About ordinary afternoons beneath the lighthouse. About paper windmills spinning in the ocean breeze. About learning that courage often looked like simple compassion. About forgiveness. About choosing hope. Their memories still returned in gentle fragments, but neither hurried them anymore. Some questions remained unanswered. Neither felt troubled by that. Life did not require every mystery to be solved. Sometimes it simply asked people to continue living with open hearts. Spring arrived sooner than expected. Wildflowers once again surrounded Moonkeeper Lighthouse. The old bench overlooking the sea had been repaired by villagers. Children often played nearby without knowing the history hidden beneath their feet. One bright morning, Jungkook and Jimin carried the restored wooden sign from the lighthouse to the cliffs. Beside the entrance to the old trail, they placed a smaller plaque beneath it. The words were simple. "May every traveler leave with more hope than they brought." Visitors soon began walking the path again. Some came for the breathtaking sunrise. Others came seeking quiet. Many simply sat upon the old bench, listening to the waves. No one knew about the underground chambers. No one searched for hidden treasures. The lighthouse no longer guarded secrets. It offered peace. Late one afternoon, Jungkook stood alone beside the white rock where their childhood promise had been carved into the weathered bench. The sea shimmered beneath the golden light. Jimin approached, carrying 2 cups of warm coffee. "You always come here when you're thinking." Jungkook accepted the cup. "I was wondering." "About what?" "If my grandfather knew we'd be all right." Jimin looked toward the horizon. I think he did. How? Because he trusted us. The answer settled quietly between them. Far below, waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. Above them, seabirds glided effortlessly through the spring sky. Everything felt exactly as it should. Jungkook smiled. We spent 15 years searching for a box. Jimin laughed softly and found a home instead. They stood side by side as the first rays of evening painted the ocean in brilliant shades of gold. The iron box remained hidden beneath the lighthouse, no longer as a prison for secrets, but as a silent reminder that time may bury memories, distance may test promises, and life may scatter people onto different paths. Yet hearts shaped by kindness always recognize one another when they meet again, proving that the greatest journeys do not end when mysteries are solved, but when people finally discover where they truly belong. Summer returned to the coast exactly 1 year after Jungkook had opened the iron box. The village awakened beneath skies of brilliant blue, and the scent of blooming lavender drifted through every narrow street. Children raced along the harbor chasing seabirds, fishermen repaired their nets beneath the morning sun, and visitors once again filled the little bookstore that had quietly become the soul of the town. Above its entrance, the weathered wooden sign still greeted everyone who stepped inside. Every traveler deserves a light. Few people knew where the sign had come from. Even fewer understood why everyone instinctively smiled after reading it. Jungkook was arranging a newly donated collection of classic novels when a familiar voice called from the doorway. Delivery. He looked up. It was the village postmaster, carrying an unusually large package wrapped in thick canvas. There wasn't any sender listed. Jimin accepted the parcel. No address. Only yours. After thanking the postmaster, they placed the heavy package on the large reading table near the window. Unlike the mysterious parcels from the past, this one felt wonderfully ordinary. Brown canvas. Simple rope. Nothing dramatic. Jungkook untied the knot. Inside lay dozens of handwritten letters. Some were folded neatly. Others were tucked inside colorful envelopes decorated with flowers, stars, or tiny drawings. At the very top rested another note. From people whose lives found light in your bookstore. Jimin blinked. They wrote to us. He carefully opened the first letter. Dear Jungkook and Jimin, I came to your bookstore after losing someone I loved. I wasn't searching for answers. I only wanted somewhere quiet to breathe. Thank you for giving me a place where silence felt kind instead of lonely. He reached for another. Your recommendation helped my daughter discover her love of reading. Every evening, we now read together before bed. Thank you for changing our home in such a simple way. Another. I visited while traveling alone. I left believing strangers can still become family. The letters continued. Some were joyful, some deeply emotional. None mentioned the lighthouse. None mentioned the iron box. They spoke only about kindness. Jungkook quietly leaned back in his chair. My grandfather would have loved this. Jimin smiled. So would my grandmother. Together, they spent the afternoon reading every single letter. Not one was hurried. Each became another quiet reminder that ordinary acts often leave extraordinary footprints. When evening arrived, Hana visited carrying fresh bread from the village bakery. She found them surrounded by open letters. I see they've started arriving. You knew. She laughed softly. The villagers have been planning this for months. Jungkook looked around the room. I don't think we've done anything special. Hana gently shook her head. People rarely notice the light they're giving while they're busy sharing it. Her words lingered long after the conversation moved on. The following morning, the village held its annual seaside market. Colorful stalls stretched along the harbor. Artists displayed handmade paintings. Musicians performed cheerful melodies. Children sold painted seashells to raise money for the local school library. Jimin wandered between the stalls, carrying a basket of second-hand books donated by the bookstore. Every book was free. Anyone could take one. No payment. No conditions. Only a handwritten note tucked inside every cover. May this story find you when you need it most. Within hours, every single book had found a new owner. Late in the afternoon, a little girl approached Jungkook holding one of the novels. She looked no older than 8. "Excuse me." Jungkook smiled warmly. "Yes." She held up the book. "When I finish this." He nodded patiently. "Can I give it to someone else?" His smile widened. "I hope you do." The little girl beamed. "My grandmother says stories shouldn't stay on one shelf forever." Jungkook looked toward Hana standing nearby. She winked knowingly. That evening, after the market ended, the villagers gathered on the beach. A long wooden table overlooked the ocean. Everyone contributed something. Fresh fruit, warm bread, homemade soup, music, laughter. There were no speeches, no celebrations of heroes, only neighbors sharing another peaceful sunset together. As darkness slowly settled over the water, Jimin quietly slipped away toward the old lighthouse path. Jungkook followed. The climb felt familiar now. Wildflowers lined both sides of the trail. The repaired wooden bench waited exactly where it always had. The carved promise remained visible despite the passing seasons. "We'll always find each other." Jimin brushed his fingers gently across the weathered letters. "Funny. What is?" "We thought this promise was only about us." Jungkook sat beside him. "You don't anymore." Jimin looked toward the village lights glowing below. "I think it became something bigger." He smiled softly. "We found each other." He gestured toward the harbor. "And because of that." Warm light shimmered across the village. Families laughed together. Children chased fireflies. Music drifted gently through the evening air. Other people found something too. Jungkook followed his gaze. "Hope. Belonging. Peace." The promise made by 2 frightened children 15 years earlier had quietly continued growing long after they had forgotten making it. Not because it had been magical. Because kindness always travels farther than the people who first choose it. The sea breeze carried the scent of lavender up the cliffs once again. Jungkook reached into his pocket and removed the tiny lighthouse pendant. He placed it beside the carving on the old bench. The silver lantern reflected the moonlight with quiet brilliance. Neither spoke. There was nothing left that required words. The lighthouse stood peacefully against the star-filled sky, no longer guarding hidden chambers or forgotten memories, but watching over a village whose greatest treasure had become the simple decision of its people to keep passing light from one heart to another, ensuring that the promise begun by 2 children would continue for generations yet to come. Years slipped by with the quiet certainty of the tides. Every morning, the first sunlight touched the windows of the little bookstore before spilling across the wooden floor, exactly as it always had. Jungkook would unlock the front door while Jimin prepared fresh coffee in the small corner kitchen. Before the first customer arrived, they always paused for a single moment beneath the old lighthouse sign. Neither planned the ritual. It simply became part of their mornings. Outside, the village slowly flourished. Families who had once considered moving away chose to stay. Young artists opened small studios along the harbor. Musicians gathered on weekends to perform beside the sea. Travelers from distant places began calling the town the village of quiet stories. No one realized that its gentle reputation had begun with an unopened iron box and a promise made by two children. One bright spring afternoon, the mayor visited the bookstore carrying several rolled blueprints. "I have something I'd like you both to see." He spread the papers across the reading table. They showed plans for restoring Moonkeeper Lighthouse, not as a tourist attraction, not as a museum, but as a public library overlooking the sea. Jimin looked up in surprise. "A library." The mayor smiled. "The villagers voted." Jungkook blinked. "They did." The decision was unanimous. He pointed toward the drawings. "The lighthouse guided ships for generations." He smiled warmly. "Now we'd like it to guide readers." For a long moment, neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke. The proposal felt almost impossible. The lighthouse had once protected secrets hidden beneath its foundations. Now it would protect stories shared with everyone. Several months later, restoration finally began. Local carpenters repaired broken beams. Stone masons strengthened the ancient walls. Volunteers carefully cleaned every room without disturbing the hidden underground chambers that remained peacefully sealed beneath the structure. Jungkook often helped rebuild old bookshelves. Jimin organized donations of books arriving from neighboring towns. Children painted colorful signs pointing visitors toward reading corners overlooking the cliffs. Slowly, the abandoned lighthouse came back to life. Its cracked windows welcomed sunlight once more. Fresh white paint covered the weathered exterior. The lantern room at the top of the tower was carefully restored, not with a gidding flame for ships, but with a circular reading room surrounded by glass. Anyone sitting there could watch both sunrise and sunset over the endless sea. On the day the restoration was completed, nearly the entire village climbed the cliffs together. The ribbon stretched across the entrance, fluttered gently in the ocean breeze. Hana stood beside Jungkook and Jimin. Her silver hair had grown thinner over the years, but her smile remained just as warm. She handed the scissors to the youngest child in the village. "You should do the honors." The little boy looked astonished. "Me?" She nodded. "Every story belongs to the next generation." The ribbon was cut. Applause echoed across the cliffs. Children rushed eagerly inside. Some headed straight for the adventure section. Others climbed the spiral staircase toward the reading room at the top. Adults wandered quietly through shelves filled with history, poetry, science, and novels donated from every corner of the country. The old lighthouse was alive again. Not because of its walls, because of the people filling them with laughter. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Jungkook and Jimin climbed to the lantern room. The sunset painted the horizon in brilliant shades of gold and deep orange. Books lined every wall. Comfortable chairs surrounded wide windows overlooking the sea. The room smelled of polished wood, fresh paper, and salt carried by the evening breeze. Jimin walked slowly to the center of the room. "I think they'd be happy." Jungkook nodded. "I think this is what they hoped for." They looked toward the ocean, where countless waves continued their endless journey toward distant shores. Far below, the village lights began glowing one by one. The bookstore windows shone warmly. The harbor reflected tiny golden stars. Everything felt connected. A knock interrupted the peaceful silence. They turned. A young woman stood hesitantly in the doorway, holding an old leather notebook. "I'm sorry to disturb you." Jimin smiled kindly. "Not at all." She stepped inside. "My grandfather passed away last month." She gently placed the notebook upon the table. "He always told me," she swallowed softly, "that if I ever found this, I should bring it to the lighthouse library." Jungkook carefully opened the worn notebook. Inside were sketches of the village from nearly 50 years earlier. The harbor, the cliffs, the lighthouse. Near the final page, a beautiful pencil drawing captured two little boys running beneath the morning sun. One carried a paper windmill. The other laughed while trying to catch it. There were no names. None were needed. At the bottom of the page, written in graceful handwriting, appeared one final sentence. "The brightest lights are the ones people carry inside themselves." Silence settled over the lantern room. The young woman smiled gently. "I thought it belonged here." Jimin closed the notebook with extraordinary care. "It does." They placed it inside a glass display case overlooking the sea. Not as a relic, not as a mystery, but as a reminder. Visitors who admired the drawing simply saw two happy children. Only Jungkook and Jimin understood that the greatest part of the picture was not what it showed. It was what it had become. A simple memory transformed into a legacy of kindness. As the first evening stars appeared above the restored lighthouse, its lantern room glowed softly, not to warn sailors of hidden rocks, but to welcome every traveler searching for comfort, wisdom, or hope, proving that while buildings may age and memories may fade, a promise fulfilled through compassion can illuminate countless lives long after the people who first made it are gone. Time continued to flow like the tides beneath Moonkeeper Lighthouse, never hurried, never still. The restored lighthouse library soon became the most beloved place in the village. Every morning, before the doors opened, Jungkook climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room and opened each window one by one, allowing the fresh ocean breeze to wander through the shelves. Moments later, Jimin arrived carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee and a small vase filled with wildflowers gathered from the cliffs. It was a quiet tradition, one they never missed. The library welcomed readers of every age. Children curled up in cozy corners with adventure stories. Elderly visitors spent long afternoons reading poetry while listening to the waves outside. Travelers often remained far longer than planned, captivated not only by the books, but by the peace that seemed to live within the old stone walls. One afternoon, a teacher from a neighboring town arrived with a class of students. She smiled warmly at Jungkook. "I've brought them here because I wanted them to understand something." "What is that?" Jungkook asked. She looked around the library. "That kindness can become architecture." The words stayed with him long after the children had gone home. That evening, he repeated them to Jimin while they closed the library. "Kindness can become architecture." Jimin smiled thoughtfully. "I think she's right." He rested his hand gently on one of the old wooden shelves. "Every beam in this lighthouse holds someone's kindness. The people who repaired it, the families who donated books, the villagers who believed it deserved another life." Jungkook nodded. "And the people who protected it before us." The last rays of sunlight poured through the lantern room, painting the floor with warm circles of gold. Neither spoke again. Some thoughts were complete without further words. Several weeks later, the village celebrated the 10th anniversary of the bookstore's transformation into a community gathering place. Children who had once visited to hear bedtime stories had now grown into young adults. Some had become teachers. Others were artists, writers, musicians, or doctors. Many returned carrying memories they wanted to share. The mayor announced a surprise during the celebration. We've collected something. He gestured toward a beautifully crafted wooden cabinet covered with blue cloth. When the bookstore first became part of our village's heart, visitors began leaving letters. Jimin exchanged a surprised glance with Jungkook. The mayor continued. We never stopped collecting them. The cloth was lifted. Inside the cabinet rested hundreds of carefully preserved envelopes. Each carried a date, a name, or sometimes no name at all. Every letter described a moment when someone had discovered hope within the bookstore or lighthouse library. A widow who learned to smile again after reading her husband's favorite novel. A lonely teenager inspired to become an author. A child who overcame fear after finding courage inside an adventure story. A traveler who postponed leaving for one extra day and eventually decided to build a new life in the village. Jungkook quietly opened one random envelope. Inside, only a single sentence had been written. Someone believed in me before I believed in myself. He closed the letter gently. His eyes glistened. Jimin placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We never knew. Jungkook shook his head softly. I don't think we were supposed to. The celebration continued long into the evening. Music drifted across the harbor. Lanterns illuminated every street. Children chased one another beneath strings of glowing lights. Near sunset, Hana asked Jungkook and Jimin to walk with her one final time to the old bench overlooking the sea. The climb was slower now. Her steps had grown careful with age. When they reached the familiar cliff, she smiled upon seeing the weathered carving that still remained. We'll always find each other. She traced the letters lovingly. You know. Her voice was gentle. When your grandparents first carved this bench with you, they worried the wood would someday disappear. Jimin looked at the faded words. It almost did. Hana nodded. But promises aren't remembered because of wood. She touched her heart. They're remembered because people choose to keep living them. The three of them sat together watching the sunset. The sea glowed with shades of crimson and gold. After a long, peaceful silence, Hana reached into her coat pocket. She handed Jungkook a small envelope. I've been saving this. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front were two familiar names. For Jungkook and Jimin. Jungkook carefully unfolded the letter. Inside was a single page written in his grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. If you are reading this, then enough years have passed for you to understand something I once struggled to explain. The greatest treasures cannot be locked inside iron boxes forever. They must eventually be given away. We protected your memories because you were too young to carry them. But kindness grows only when it is shared freely. If the lighthouse becomes a place where strangers feel welcome, if books replace fear, if laughter returns to these cliffs, then our work is finished. From that day forward, the story belongs entirely to you. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin noticed the tears quietly running down their faces. There was no sorrow in them, only gratitude. They folded the letter carefully and looked toward the lighthouse, standing proudly against the evening sky. Its windows reflected the final light of day like tiny stars. For the first time, they no longer saw a place filled with secrets. They saw a home built from countless acts of compassion, strengthened by generations who had chosen hope over fear. As darkness gently embraced the coastline, the waves continued whispering against the cliffs, carrying with them the quiet truth that every promise, no matter how small, has the power to outlive the people who first make it, becoming a light passed from one heart to another until it finally belongs to everyone. The years passed as gently as the tide, leaving silver threads in Jungkook's hair and a quiet wisdom in Jimin's smile. Seasons continued to circle the little coastal village, but some things never changed. Every morning, the bookstore opened with the scent of fresh coffee and old pages. Every afternoon, the Lighthouse Library welcomed readers beneath its restored lantern room. Every evening, the sea carried the same patient rhythm that had watched generations come and go. The iron box remained exactly where it belonged, hidden beneath Moonkeeper Lighthouse, not because anyone feared what it contained, but because its purpose had already been fulfilled. It had never existed to keep secrets forever. It had existed to protect hope until the right hearts were ready to carry it. One spring morning, nearly 20 years after the box had first been opened, a group of schoolchildren arrived at the Lighthouse Library for a storytelling day. Their laughter echoed through the spiral staircase exactly as Jungkook remembered from the fragments of his own childhood. One curious little boy wandered away from the group and stopped in front of the glass display containing the old photograph of two boys running beneath the lighthouse with a paper windmill. He looked up at Jungkook. "Who are they?" Jungkook smiled. "They were two very good friends. What happened to them?" "They grew up." The boy frowned thoughtfully. "Did they stay friends?" Jungkook glanced across the room. Jimin was helping a little girl choose her very first novel, kneeling so they could read the title together. He laughed softly. "Yes, for their whole lives." The boy looked relieved. "I like stories like that." "So do I." The children gathered in a circle while Jimin opened an old adventure book. Outside, sunlight poured through the lantern windows, filling the room with warm golden light. As Jimin began reading aloud, Jungkook quietly walked to the highest balcony of the lighthouse. The ocean stretched endlessly before him. The same cliffs, the same waves, the same horizon that had once witnessed two frightened children making a promise they would forget with their minds but remember with their hearts. Footsteps approached behind him. Jimin joined him without speaking. They stood side by side, watching a flock of white seabirds glide effortlessly above the water. After a long silence, Jimin smiled. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had opened the iron box before meeting me?" Jungkook looked toward the distant sunrise. "I think it would have been just another box." "And now?" Jungkook smiled gently. "Now it reminds me that some answers only make sense when they're shared." The sea breeze carried the fragrance of lavender from the cliffs below. Church bells rang softly from the village. Children's laughter floated upward from the library beneath them. Everything they had once searched for had quietly become their everyday life. Jimin reached into his pocket and removed the tiny lighthouse pendant. Years had polished the silver until it shone brilliantly in the morning light. He placed it into Jungkook's hand. "I think it belongs here now." Together they walked to the lantern room. At its center stood a beautifully crafted wooden display containing the old photograph, the paper windmill, the seashell bracelet, the music box, the letters, the maps, and every object that had once seemed like pieces of an impossible mystery. Jungkook carefully placed the pendant beside them. No locks, no glass covers, no warnings, only a small, handwritten card. "The greatest treasures are not the things we keep hidden, but the kindness we choose to pass on." Years later, visitors often paused before the display. Some smiled, some grew thoughtful, some quietly held the hand of the person beside them. Few knew the complete story. None needed to. Because the true inheritance of the iron box had never been the letters, the maps, the hidden chambers, or the forgotten memories. Its true inheritance was every smile shared inside the bookstore. Every child who discovered a love of reading. Every traveler who found comfort. Every lonely heart that walked away believing the world could still be gentle. On the anniversary of the lighthouse library's opening, the villagers gathered once again beneath the evening sky for the Festival of Lanterns. Hundreds of glowing lanterns rose into the darkness, floating above the sea like countless golden stars. Jungkook and Jimin released the final lantern together. Neither wrote a wish this time. They had learned that the happiest lives are not built by wishing for tomorrow, but by being grateful for today. They watched their lantern rise higher and higher until it disappeared among the stars. The ocean whispered against the cliffs. The lighthouse glowed warmly behind them. The bookstore lights welcomed late readers home. Far beneath the lighthouse, the iron box rested peacefully in the darkness, no longer waiting for someone to open it, because its final purpose had already been fulfilled. It had patiently protected a promise until two hearts were ready to remember that love is not measured by the years people spend apart, nor by the memories they lose, but by the kindness they continue to choose when they find each other again. And so the story of the iron box did not end with a mystery solved. It ended with a village filled with light, a lighthouse filled with stories, a bookstore filled with hope, and two lifelong friends who discovered that the most extraordinary treasure in the world was never hidden inside a box at all. It had always been waiting inside the human heart.